Single dad janitor bought bread for an elderly woman, not knowing she was a billionaire CEO's mother. Why did a single dad janitor decide to buy bread for an elderly woman? And what makes her connection to a billionaire CEO so important? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We're delighted to have you here for another touching story filled with unexpected connections and powerful moments. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our newest uploads. Thank you so much for watching, supporting our channel, and being part of this growing community. Now, tell us in the comments, would you help an elderly stranger if you saw that they needed it? With that question in mind, let's step into the beginning of this remarkable story and discover where it all started. Daniel's last crumpled $5 bill trembled between his fingers as the elderly woman's knees began to buckle. "Ma'am, sit here. I'm fine. You're freezing." Outside the bakery window, tires hissed over wet pavement, and the neon open sign painted the sidewalk red. Warm air escaped each time the glass door swung wide, carrying the smell of yeast, cinnamon, and roasted coffee toward the woman standing beneath the awning. Her gray coat was elegant but too thin for the cold. Rain had darkened its shoulders, and both hands shook around an empty leather purse. Daniel glanced through the glass. Behind the counter, one bowl of soup waited beneath an amber heat lamp. Beside it sat a round loaf with a crisp, flour-dusted crust. He checked his phone. A message from Lily filled the screen. "Can we have grilled cheese tonight, Dad?" His thumb hovered over the reply. In his other hand lay the money meant for his lunch before an 8-hour janitorial shift. No lawyer watched him. No camera demanded kindness. No one would have blamed him for walking away. Daniel stepped inside. The bell chimed sharply above him. "Soup in that loaf, please." The cashier counted the bill and coins, then pushed back 3 pennies. "That's everything." "I know." He carried the paper bag and steaming cup outside, where the woman had lowered herself onto the cold metal bench. Her shoes were polished, though one heel was badly scuffed. Daniel placed the soup between her palms and tucked the bread beside her. "Slow sips," he said. "It's hot." She studied his faded work jacket, then the lunch container visible inside his backpack. "Was this yours?" "It is now." "Then what will you eat?" "I've missed lunch before." The spoon clicked softly against the cardboard cup. Steam touched her lined face while the rain tapped the awning in a steady rhythm. Daniel turned away long enough to text Lily. "Change of plans, bug. Toast and eggs tonight. I'll make the toast extra crispy." 3 dots appeared, then her answer. "Okay. Save me the crunchy corner." His jaw tightened once. Then he smiled. The woman tore the loaf carefully, but before taking a bite, she held half toward him. "Please." Daniel shook his head. "You need it more. You don't even know my name." "You looked cold." That was enough. Her fingers closed around the bread. A plain silver ring caught the bakery light, worn smooth with age. She watched him zip his jacket and adjust the backpack strap across his shoulder. "At least tell me yours." "Daniel." "Daniel what?" A city bus groaned to the curb, brakes squealing through the wet street. He stepped toward its open doors. "Just Daniel." The doors folded shut, leaving the woman beneath the awning with warm soup, fresh bread, and 3 words no one in her world had spoken without wanting something in return. Through the fogged window, Daniel checked the time printed on his Sterling Foods employee badge. If the bus moved quickly, he would clock in before anyone noticed. On the bench, Evelyn brushed crumbs from her glove, rose to her feet, and looked down the same avenue toward the glass tower where that badge would take him. She still had not told Daniel her name, but now she knew his. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the marble lobby, bleaching every surface into shades of silver and white. The sharp scent of disinfectant drifted beneath the warmer smell of coffee from the executive elevators. Evelyn stepped inside Sterling Foods and paused when a yellow mop bucket rolled across her path. Behind it, wearing gray coveralls and the same employee badge she had seen through the bakery window, Daniel guided a floor machine over the rain-streaked tile. His movements were measured, almost invisible among polished shoes and tailored coats. Then a plastic container struck the floor near the security desk. "Look what you did." "I'm sorry, sir." "Sorry doesn't clean this up." A young cafeteria worker stood beneath Gavin Ross's stare, her dark hair pinned beneath a paper cap. Lentil soup spread across the tile, while Gavin pointed at the mess as though presenting evidence to a jury. People like you come here, barely speak English, and expect everyone else to fix your mistakes. Conversations thinned around them. Elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but no one stepped forward. Daniel switched off the floor machine. The motor's hum died, leaving only the drip of soup from the overturned container. He crossed the lobby, placed his mop between Gavin and the worker, and knelt to gather the broken lid. The wheel caught the edge of her cart. Gavin looked down. "Did I ask you?" "No, then keep moving." Daniel set the container upright. The floor slopes beside that drain. Maintenance reported it last week. The worker's fingers tightened around her apron. Daniel glanced at her name tag. "Marisol, take the cart back to the kitchen. I'll handle this." "But Mr. Ross said," "You heard him," Gavin cut in. "She cleans it." Daniel rose slowly. Water whispered beneath his rubber soles. "Then write me up for taking her assignment." A few employees stopped pretending not to watch. Gavin's jaw flexed, and his gaze dropped to Daniel's badge as if memorizing the number. "You're a janitor." "Yes." "So learn your place." Daniel took the mop in both hands. "My place is wherever the mess is." No anger sharpened the words. That quiet dignity made them heavier. Gavin stepped closer, his cologne cutting through the bleach. "One more stunt like this, and you won't have a place here at all." He turned toward the elevators, leaving Marisol untouched, but Daniel marked. Only after the doors closed did the lobby breathe again. Daniel handed Marisol an unbroken lid from his supply cart. She whispered thanks and pushed the rattling cart away. He returned to the spill, unaware that Evelyn had watched every second. At the reception desk, she declined the visitor badge offered to her and kept her name off the register. Revealing herself would end the moment. Remaining silent would show her who Daniel was when he believed no powerful person was looking. She crossed to the maintenance counter and touched the worn edge of his cart. "Daniel." He looked up, recognition arriving slowly beneath the cold light. "The bakery. You remembered. Did the soup help?" Evelyn studied the man who asked about her meal before asking why she stood inside his workplace. Across the lobby, Gavin spoke into his phone and glanced back at Daniel. Evelyn saw that glance. She also saw the security camera above the drain, its red light steady, recording the slope, the spill, and every word. "It helped more than you know," she said. Daniel rested both hands on the mop handle. "Are you here to see someone?" Evelyn looked toward the executive elevators, then back at the warning already forming in Gavin's eyes. "Not yet." She stepped away without giving Daniel her name, but this time her silence was no longer privacy. It was a decision to keep watching, and Gavin Ross had just given her a reason. A sharp alarm chirped twice beyond the production doors, cutting through the hiss of steam and the metallic rattle of conveyor belts. Warm air carried the sweet smell of tomato sauce into the corridor, but beneath it lingered something sour, like wet cardboard left too long in heat. Daniel was pushing his cart toward the sanitation closet when a thin ribbon of gray water crept from under a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He stopped. Inside, workers in white coats were sealing cups of pasta bound for elementary school cafeterias across the county. The gray water was moving toward the packaging line. Maintenance already cleared it, a supervisor said, blocking his path. "Keep walking." That water crossed the clean zone line. "You're a janitor, Daniel." 3 quick sentences. Then the conveyor clattered on, bright foil lids flashing beneath blue inspection lamps. Daniel crouched and touched a gloved finger to the wet floor. The liquid was warm, gritty, and carried the unmistakable odor of a backed-up drain. A red shipping label passed above him. "School meal program." He rose. "Stop the line." The supervisor gave a dry laugh. "You don't have that authority." "Then call someone who does." "Move your cart." Daniel looked through the narrow window in the door. Splash marks darkened the wheels of a supply rack. Those same wheels had already rolled across the sanitation boundary. The question was no longer whether contamination could reach the food. It was how much had already passed. At the far end of the corridor, Evelyn stood beside a vending machine, her coat still damp from the rain. She had been waiting for an elevator when the alarm sounded. Now she watched Daniel remove the brass key ring from his belt. "Don't do it," the supervisor warned. "Opening that door violates procedure." Daniel unlocked it anyway. Heat struck his face. Motors hummed. Workers shouted over the belts, and thousands of sealed meals traveled toward cardboard cases. He walked past the supervisor, reached the emergency control station, and pressed the red stop button. The machinery wound down with a long mechanical groan. Silence spread from one end of the room to the other. "Restart it," the supervisor snapped. "Now." Daniel took a yellow sanitation chain from the wall, stretched it across the entrance, and locked the gate. "Not until quality assurance tests the line. You just shut down an entire shift." "I shut down contaminated equipment. You'll answer for every dollar." Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. Lily's message glowed across the screen. "Dad, nurse says my inhaler is almost empty." He read it once, placed the phone face down on his cart, and kept his hand on the locked gate. The supervisor called Gavin Ross. Daniel called quality assurance. 20 minutes later, an inspector in a blue lab coat swabbed the drain water, the rack wheels, and the lower conveyor housing. The room had cooled. Without the machines, every dripping pipe sounded like a ticking clock. Evelyn remained outside the chain, saying nothing. The inspector's handheld reader beeped. She checked it again, then lifted her eyes. Positive bacterial contamination. Hold every case produced since 6 a.m. Workers stopped whispering. Nearly 8,000 meals were pulled before they could reach loading docks and children's lunch trays. The supervisor stepped away from Daniel, as if the uniform no longer told the whole truth. Evelyn approached the gate and rested one hand on the cold steel. "You knew what this could cost you." Daniel looked at Lily's message again. "I knew who could pay if I stayed quiet." An elevator bell sounded behind them. Gavin emerged with 2 security officers, his polished shoes striking the concrete in hard, measured beats. He saw the locked line, the quarantined pallets, and Daniel holding the only key. "My office," Gavin said. 5 minutes. Daniel slipped the key ring back onto his belt. This time, Gavin did not threaten him from across a lobby. He waited at the forbidden door while Daniel opened it and followed him inside. The office door clicked shut, muting the conveyor alarms until only the air vent's dry hiss remained. Fluorescent light glazed the steel desk, and the room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and industrial sanitizer. Gavin Ross dropped the suspension form in front of Daniel. "You shut down a production line. The line was contaminated. You cost this company 6 figures." Daniel remained standing, his damp work gloves tucked beneath one arm. Beyond the glass wall, workers watched quarantined pallets roll toward storage. Gavin turned his monitor around. The confirmed test results glowed on screen, but his finger tapped a different number: lost output. "Quality assurance validated the shutdown," Daniel said. "After you exceeded your authority. Those meals were going to schools." Gavin's jaw tightened. Then he pressed the intercom. "Security, come in." The officers entered without speaking, their radios crackling softly against the hum of the lights. Gavin slid the form closer. "Effective immediately, you're suspended without pay pending review. Turn over your badge and keys." Daniel's phone vibrated against his hip. Lily's name appeared above a message. "Dad." The inhaler made the empty sound again. The letters stayed bright for 3 seconds before the screen dimmed. Daniel unclipped the key ring first. Brass struck steel with a hard, final clatter. Then he removed the badge Evelyn had noticed outside the bakery and placed it beside the keys. "How long is the review?" "As long as necessary." "My health insurance?" Gavin leaned back in his leather chair. "Suspended employees lose active benefits at midnight." Cold air moved through the vent. Daniel looked at the clock. "For 17 p.m., my daughter needs an asthma appointment tomorrow." "Then perhaps," Gavin said, lowering his voice, "you should have considered your family before playing hero." Daniel's hand flattened against the desk, not striking it, simply holding himself steady against its icy edge. "I considered 8,000 families." No one answered. Even the security radios seemed to fall quiet. In the corridor, Evelyn stood beside the darkened production window. She saw Gavin emerge first, straightening his cuffs, and Daniel follow without his badge. One officer carried the key ring. The other held a cardboard box containing Daniel's gloves, lunch thermos, and framed photograph of Lily. Evelyn stepped into their path. What happened? Gavin glanced at her worn coat. This is an internal personnel matter. Was he wrong about the contamination? Ma'am, leave the facility. Daniel lifted the box before security could hand it over. It's all right. Evelyn's eyes moved from his empty belt clip to the message still visible on his phone. Inhaler. Almost empty. She said nothing, but her fingers closed around the edge of her coat pocket until the fabric creased. Daniel crossed the lobby beneath the same fluorescent lights where he had defended Marisol. At the revolving door, his phone rang. The pharmacy technician spoke over the hiss of passing traffic outside. Lily's replacement inhaler required a new prescription, and without active coverage, the medication would cost $286. Daniel looked through the rain-streaked glass at the bus pulling away from the curb. Please hold it until tomorrow, he said. We can hold it until 6, the technician replied. After that, it goes back into inventory. The call ended. Behind him, Gavin told security to deactivate Daniel's building access before midnight. Evelyn watched Daniel step into the freezing rain carrying everything Sterling Foods had allowed him to keep. Then the lobby doors locked behind him. Rain tapped the glass tower in thin, impatient fingers while the lobby's fluorescent lights hummed above the polished floor. At the security desk, Gavin Ross handed a flash drive to a guard and spoke without lowering his voice. The cafeteria footage is routine. Archive it. Evelyn waited until the elevator doors swallowed him, then crossed the marble with her cane, clicking once, twice, 3 times. I need the incident report involving Daniel. The guard barely looked up. Employees only. Then call corporate records. Do you have an appointment? No. The lobby smelled of lemon disinfectant and wet wool. Evelyn removed a plain silver card from her coat, turned it face down, and slid it beneath the glass. The guard read what was printed there. His chair rolled back with a soft squeak. 10 minutes later, Evelyn sat in a records room cold enough to preserve more than paper. Gray filing cabinets lined the walls, and a printer coughed warm pages into a plastic tray. She requested the sanitation alarm log, quality assurance test results, Daniel's suspension order, and the maintenance complaints Daniel had cited while defending Marisol. Those files are restricted, the records clerk said. By whose order? Mr. Ross. Show me the order. There wasn't one. Gavin had used his position, not policy, to bury the trail. Evelyn signed the access register with a hand that did not tremble. For the first time in years, she wrote her full legal name inside a Sterling Foods building. Then she began making copies. Marisol was wiping cafeteria tables when Evelyn found her. The air carried the sour trace of yesterday's soup, and one wheel of the cart rattled whenever it moved across the defective slope. Daniel said the floor had been reported. Evelyn said, "Was that true?" Marisol glanced toward the camera in the corner. 3 times. Will you put that in writing? Gavin can fire me. Evelyn placed the maintenance reports between them. Each bore Marisol's signature, and a supervisor's ignored receipt stamp. Silence has already protected the wrong man. Marisol's fingers tightened around the rag. Then she sat down, pulled the witness form closer, and uncapped the pen. The statement gave Evelyn testimony. It did not give her the footage. At security operations, the monitor wall cast a blue chill across her face. The cafeteria recording had been flagged for deletion, while the production zone video had been trimmed to begin after Daniel stopped the conveyor. Restore the original files, Evelyn told the technician. Mr. Ross authorized the edits. And I am authorizing the audit. The technician hesitated until Evelyn turned over the silver card. This time, her name and family office credentials faced upward. Keys began clicking. A progress bar crawled across the screen as hidden backups returned from the server. The restored video showed Gavin receiving an earlier warning about the drain leak. It showed him ordering production to continue. It showed Daniel stopping what Gavin had knowingly allowed. By dusk, Evelyn had sealed copies of the footage, laboratory results, maintenance reports, access logs, and Marisol's signed statement inside a black portfolio. Her phone screen glowed with several unanswered calls from the family office. She finally returned one. "Mrs. Sterling," a man said carefully, "Victoria should be informed before you take action involving the company." Evelyn looked through the rain-streaked window toward the street where Daniel had disappeared without his badge, his insurance, or the medicine his daughter needed. "No," she replied. "Victoria will be informed because I am taking action." She sent one message requesting an emergency board meeting and attached the evidence before anyone could erase it again. The reply arrived less than a minute later. "Your attendance will make this a public family matter." "Confirm?" Evelyn pressed confirm. Across the building, executive phones began ringing. The envelope slid across the laminate table with a dry whisper, stopping beside Lily's nearly empty inhaler. Fluorescent light buzzed above the cramped legal aid room, and the radiator breathed out air that smelled faintly of dust and hot metal. Daniel did not touch the envelope. Across from him, a Sterling Foods attorney aligned a silver pen with the edge of a settlement agreement. $50,000. For what? Your signature. The attorney opened the document and tapped two clauses with one polished fingernail. Daniel would withdraw every complaint, surrender any right to sue, and never discuss the shutdown, the contamination, or Sterling Foods with employees, regulators, reporters, or school districts. In return, the company would characterize his departure as voluntary and issue payment within 48 hours. Daniel's phone vibrated against the table. The property manager's message filled the screen. Final notice. Vacate by Friday. A second notification waited beneath it, this one from the pharmacy reminding him that Lily's replacement medication remained unpaid. The attorney glanced at the inhaler. "This solves your immediate problems. It erases theirs. It protects your daughter." Daniel lifted the agreement. The paper was thick and smooth, the kind designed to make surrender feel respectable. Outside the frosted window, tires hissed over wet pavement. He turned to the page marked confidentiality and read every line while the wall clock clicked toward 4. $50,000 meant medicine, rent, groceries, and months without counting coins at the kitchen counter. It meant Lily could breathe without him listening from the doorway at night. Then his eyes reached the sentence declaring there was no confirmed danger to the public. "That isn't true." The attorney capped his pen. "It is the company's position." Daniel placed the contract flat between them. 8,000 school meals were quarantined, and none were shipped. Signing changes nothing about that outcome. It changes who is allowed to tell the truth. Silence settled beneath the electrical hum. Daniel picked up the pen, and for one brief second the attorney's shoulders loosened. Then Daniel drew a single line through the signature box, wrote, "I will not lie," beneath it, and pushed both pen and agreement back. The attorney's expression hardened. "Once you leave, the offer disappears. Then let it." The envelope remained unopened as Daniel stepped into the hallway, where Lily sat beneath a flickering exit sign with her backpack hugged against her coat. She studied his empty hands, then held up her inhaler and gave it a careful shake. No rattle came from the canister. "Did they help?" she asked. Daniel crouched until they were eye to eye. The hallway smelled of floor wax and cold rain drifting through the lobby doors. "They offered money to make me say nothing happened." Lily looked toward the closed conference room door. "But something did." "Yes." "Then don't say nothing." Daniel pressed his forehead gently to hers. His phone rang before he could answer. The property manager spoke without greeting. Payment had not arrived. The eviction filing had been completed, and the locks would be changed Friday morning. When the call ended, another message appeared from a county family services caseworker. Because Daniel had reported losing his income, insurance, and housing, the agency needed proof by the next afternoon that Lily would have a safe residence and access to medication. Failure to provide it could trigger an emergency custody review. Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen. Losing wages had emptied his wallet. Refusing the settlement could now empty his home and take his daughter from his care. Lily slipped her small hand into his. Together they walked into the rain, carrying one backpack, one silent inhaler, and less than 24 hours to prove that telling the truth had not made Daniel incapable of being her father. Rainwater ticked against the black sedan's roof while warm air breathed from the dashboard vents, carrying the faint scent of leather and peppermint. Behind the wheel, a gray-haired driver watched the curb as Evelyn opened the rear door and held it for Daniel and Lily. "There's somewhere you need to be." Daniel stopped beneath the building's cold blue awning, one hand gripping Lily's backpack. "I have until tomorrow afternoon to find housing and her medication." "I know," Evelyn said. "And I know why you have neither." 10 minutes later, the sedan entered Sterling Foods' underground garage. Fluorescent tubes flashed across the windows, and the tires whispered over polished concrete. Daniel stared at the elevators he had once ridden before dawn with a mop bucket and a ring of brass keys. Now his badge was gone, and a security officer was waiting beside an open elevator. "Mrs. Sterling," the officer said, lowering his head. Daniel's gaze shifted to Evelyn. She offered no explanation. She simply pressed the button for the executive floor. Lily stayed close to Daniel as the elevator climbed, her empty inhaler making a hollow plastic click inside her coat pocket. On the top floor, Evelyn led them past frosted glass walls and assistants frozen over glowing computer screens. The air smelled of coffee and furniture polish. At the end of the corridor, 2 walnut doors stood closed beneath a brushed steel sign. "Board of Directors." Gavin Ross's voice carried through the wood. "This meeting has no procedural basis." "It does now," Evelyn replied. She pushed both doors open. 12 directors turned toward them beneath a ceiling of recessed white lights. Gavin stood beside a wall display filled with production figures. The Sterling Foods attorney sat near a thick folder stamped "Confidential." At the head of the table, Victoria looked up from a tablet. Her tailored black suit was immaculate, but the color left her face when she saw the elderly woman in the doorway. Her chair scraped sharply across the floor. "Mom." The single word silenced the ventilation hum. Evelyn entered first. Daniel remained at the threshold, his wet work shoes leaving 2 dark marks on the pale carpet. He looked from Victoria to Evelyn, then toward the silver sterling emblem mounted behind the CEO's chair. The woman who had shivered outside a bakery now walked to the head of a billion-dollar company's table without asking permission. "Yes," Evelyn said. "And I brought the man your company tried to purchase." Victoria's eyes settled on Daniel, then on Lily's backpack and the empty inhaler visible through its open zipper. "You're Daniel? I was your janitor." Gavin closed his laptop. "Victoria, this is an ambush." Evelyn placed one hand on the chair beside her and turned toward him. "No, Gavin. An ambush depends on hidden facts." She nodded to the wall display. The production figures vanished. In their place appeared a paused security image of Gavin standing beside the leaking drain before Daniel had shut down the line. A timestamp glowed in the corner. No one moved. "Daniel gave me bread when he believed I had nothing," Evelyn said. "You took everything from him after he protected 8,000 children." Victoria slowly faced Gavin. The attorney's pen stopped above his legal pad. Around the table, directors lowered their eyes from the restored footage to the man they had expected to dismiss as a janitor. Evelyn pulled out the empty chair, not for herself, but for Daniel. "Sit," she said. "This company will hear the truth from the person who paid for it." Daniel rested a hand on the chair back, but did not lower himself. Lily stood beside him, breathing carefully through parted lips. Across the table, Victoria closed her tablet and looked at her mother. "How much of this did you bring into my boardroom?" Evelyn set a thick evidence file on the polished walnut. The impact sounded like a judge's gavel. "Enough to decide whether Sterling Foods still deserves your family's name." For the first time, the power in the room no longer belonged to the people seated in it. The ventilation system hummed above the walnut table, stirring air that smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. Beneath the cold white lights, Victoria pressed a button on the speakerphone. "Gavin Ross, your employment with Sterling Foods is terminated effective immediately." Gavin pushed back his chair. "You can't do this based on a janitor's accusation. The laboratory results are not an accusation. I protected production. You endangered children." Victoria slid his security badge across the table toward the waiting officer. The plastic whispered against polished wood, then stopped at the edge. No one reached for it. Gavin glanced at the attorney, but the man closed the confidential folder and lowered his pen. A moment later, the boardroom doors shut behind Gavin with a soft click that carried more weight than a slammed door ever could. Victoria drew a corporate checkbook from her leather portfolio. Her fountain pen scratched across the paper while Lily's empty inhaler clicked softly between her fingers. "This won't undo what happened," Victoria said, signing the check, "but it can secure housing, medication, and whatever your daughter needs." She placed it before Daniel. The amount carried enough zeros to erase every overdue notice waiting in his apartment. Daniel looked at Lily. Her shoulders rose carefully beneath her faded coat. Then he looked at Evelyn, whose weathered hands rested beside the evidence file. He left the check untouched. "Is this compensation?" he asked. "Or gratitude?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Does the distinction matter tonight?" "It matters tomorrow." Daniel pushed the check back with 2 fingers. "A favor saves one family. Justice changes what happens to the next one." The room cooled into silence. Even the ventilation seemed to recede. "I want Marisol protected," Daniel continued. "I want every worker Gavin fired, demoted, or punished for reporting safety problems reviewed for reinstatement and back pay. And I want an independent whistleblower office, outside the plant chain of command, with anonymous reporting and written protection against retaliation." One director removed his glasses. Another stared at the blank legal pad before him. "Those measures could expose years of employment claims," the Sterling Foods attorney warned. "And publicly admitting oversight failures could damage the brand across every market we serve." Evelyn rose. Her chair rolled backward over the carpet with a muted thump. "Then let the brand be damaged." Victoria turned toward her. "Mom, our name is not porcelain." Evelyn's voice remained quiet, but every face lifted. "If truth can break it, it deserves to break." She opened the evidence file, removed her written statement, and placed it beside Daniel's rejected check. "Release my testimony. Release the restored footage. Tell the public that a man cleaning our floors showed more responsibility than the family whose name hangs above the doors." Victoria's fingers tightened around her pen. Publishing the admission would invite regulators, lawsuits, canceled contracts, and headlines bearing the Sterling name. Hiding it would preserve the empire while proving Daniel right about what its justice was worth. Lily coughed once into her sleeve. Daniel knelt, checked the empty inhaler again, then stood without reaching for the money. Victoria looked from the child to the check, from the check to her mother's statement. At last, she tore the check cleanly in half. "Reinstate the workers," she told the attorney. "Authorize back pay. Establish the independent office before the next production shift, and notify the regulators ourselves." The attorney's mouth opened. "Victoria, once we disclose, there is no taking it back," she said. Evelyn stepped beside Daniel, placing the Sterling family's reputation on the same side of the table as a janitor's dignity. Then Victoria unlocked her phone, opened the company-wide broadcast system, and held her thumb above the button that would tell thousands of employees what Sterling Foods had done. "Daniel," she said, "before I make this public, tell me what justice still owes your daughter." Lily's next breath came thin beneath the fluorescent hum, and the deadline waiting outside that boardroom had not moved by a single minute. A dry click came from Lily's inhaler. No medicine followed, only the faint whistle of her breath beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Victoria lowered her phone. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, one hand steady between her shoulder blades. "Justice doesn't owe Lily a favor," he said. "It owes her what my work already earned: insurance, wages, and a safe home." Evelyn moved first. She took the torn check from the walnut table, turned it over, and wrote an address across its back. "The bakery," she said. "Bring Lily." 20 minutes later, the chauffeured sedan stopped beside the same fogged window where warm yeast and cinnamon drifted into the winter air. The cashier was locking the door when Evelyn tapped on the glass. "Please," Evelyn said, "call 911. Her inhaler is empty." Paramedics arrived through a wash of red light, their radio chatter sharp against the quiet street. Oxygen eased Lily's breathing before they transported her for treatment. Daniel climbed into the ambulance, but Evelyn caught his sleeve. You gave away your lunch when no one was watching, she said. Now let me stand where everyone can see. While Daniel stayed with Lily, Evelyn took the next step, not as a billionaire's mother, but as the woman who had accepted bread from a stranger. At the bakery counter, under pendant lamps glowing amber over flour-dusted wood, she recorded a public statement beside Victoria. Evelyn described the cold sidewalk, the soup warming her hands, and the father who never asked her name. Then Victoria activated the broadcast. She admitted Sterling Foods had failed its workers and endangered children. She announced Daniel's immediate reinstatement, full back pay, restored health coverage retroactive to the date of suspension, payment of Lily's medical bills, and emergency housing assistance available under the same written policy to every employee facing retaliation. Marisol would return with protection. Every worker Gavin had punished would receive an independent review. The company would disclose everything to regulators. Phones began ringing before the recording ended. The Sterling name would absorb the damage in public, not hide it behind Daniel's silence. By dawn, Sterling Foods had sent proof of Daniel's reinstatement, insurance, and back pay to the County Family Services caseworker. The property manager received the overdue rent through the company's newly established Retaliation Relief Fund and canceled the eviction before the locks could be changed. Nothing was called charity. Every dollar appeared on paper as wages, benefits, or restitution owed. Later that morning, Lily left the hospital carrying a filled inhaler. Her breathing was even as she entered the bakery between Daniel and Evelyn, sunlight flashing across the chrome napkin holders. The cashier placed a loaf and 2 bowls of soup on the counter. Daniel reached for his wallet. Evelyn covered his hand with hers. Not this time. Daniel looked toward Lily, then ordered 3 more loaves. He carried them outside to people waiting in the cold, and Evelyn carried the soup beside him. The first loaf had cost him his lunch. This one cost neither of them their dignity, because justice had finally learned the difference between repaying kindness and becoming worthy of it.